Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves defense was still top 10 last year, but it was nowhere near as dominant as it was 2 seasons ago. What changed the most, and can they get back to that level this year? Plus, Anthony Edwards' importance to that development. It's all upcoming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. Happy Hump Day. And yes, we're just 3 days away from Timberwolves preseason basketball in San Diego. And this is day 2 of actual training camp for Minnesota. Today, I want to focus in on, I think, kind of an underrated storyline this year. And that's, yes, the Timberwolves offense was much better last year, but their defense wasn't. Their defense was worse than it was the year before. So I dug into the numbers a little bit. I want to talk about what happened between 23-24 and 24-25. What was the biggest difference between those two seasons regarding the Timberwolves defense and how far that caused Minnesota's defense to fall? So we'll dig into that on today's show. I want to get a little bit, certainly Ant's importance to that, but then also what's the biggest question for Minnesota this season? It's pretty easy to just say, oh, it's the Nickeil Alexander-Walker role. But is that really the biggest question mark that will ultimately determine where Minnesota ends up this season? I'll talk about why I think it might be something different, and that'll be what we do here today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Okay, so if we're going to start by talking about the defense and what changed the most between 23 and 24 and 24 and 25, let's acknowledge how good Minnesota's defense was 2 seasons ago. Remember, it was the best defense in the league. It was the second biggest difference between the best defense and the second biggest defense in terms of defensive rating that we've seen in the last 20 years. It was like a Spurs team from 15 years ago. It was the only other team that had a difference that large. Now, of course, last season, OKC's defense blew that out of the water. But I'm focusing on the Wolves 2 years ago, and that was a really, really good defense. And, of course, it was much better with Rudy Gobert on the court. Last year's defense was still very good. It was 6th in the NBA overall. And, the only teams ahead of Minnesota defensively were really good teams. We know OKC's defense was really, frankly, generationally good. Orlando was extremely good. They were only a 500 team. Of course, everyone's now picking them to be a top 3 team in the East, given the injury issues that Indiana and Boston have. Clippers, Houston, and Boston were the only teams ahead of Minnesota defensively last year overall. However, if you look at the defensive numbers when Rudy Gobert was on the floor, the difference is far less stark from last season to the year before. So last year, Minnesota Timberwolves lineups with Rudy Gobert on the floor were 91st percentile defensively. Okay. 2 years ago, when the Wolves had the best defense in the league, with Gobert on the floor, they were a 95th percentile defense. Okay. So 91st percentile last year with Rudy, 95th the year before. So yes, it slipped. I've talked pretty extensively about, part of it is, yes, Rudy lost maybe a quarter of a step overall this year. Part of it is scheme-wise, Rudy was on the perimeter a little bit more often, got pulled away from the rim. Part of it, and we'll get to this a little bit, is some of the changing from Kyle Anderson and Karl Anthony Towns to Julius, Randle, and Dante DiVincenzo in the rotation. That was the biggest difference from 2 years ago to last year. But it's a pretty small difference going from 95th percentile to 91st percentile. If you look at the numbers without Gobert on the floor, however, last season with Rudy Gobert off the floor, Minnesota was just a 39th percentile defense. 39th percentile. So well below average. 2 seasons ago, though, with Rudy Gobert off the floor, Minnesota was still an 86th percentile defensive unit. So still, frankly, an elite, a well above average defense without Rudy Gobert on the floor. And last year, they were downright bad. That is the biggest difference. It's not Rudy Gobert's regression is not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? Decline. It's not a massive decline in Rudy Gobert. It's not because Karl Anthony Towns was a significantly better defender than Julius Randle. It's a combination of factors, right? With Rudy off the floor, is there an element to personnel? Yeah, absolutely. I do think that there was a dip in overall defensive contributions from, I would say Kyle Anderson was the biggest issue, or the biggest, the biggest. Losing Kyle Anderson is probably the biggest detractor here when we're comparing the two teams. You could also argue Mike Conley losing a step. I think that had a much bigger impact than Rudy Gobert, any sort of decline from Gobert. Going from 86th percentile 2 years ago with no Rudy on the floor to 39th without him is a huge issue. And it's actually something that came up a fair amount in media day on Monday, in quotes, was the team kind of acknowledging like, hey, we've got to be better defensively with Rudy off the floor. It was kind of a theme. So, and it obviously then we could dig further into those lineups. Who's on the floor in those situations? Is it on Jaden McDaniels to be more of a rim protector? Is it on Naz Reid to just be better in space and also protect the rim? There's a variety of different things to dig into, but that's where the biggest problem comes, is what do you do differently? And honestly, they could treat it a little bit how they treat offense with Gobert off the floor, right? Like, their offense is not the same with Rudy Gobert on the floor when Rudy Gobert is off the floor. In fact, last year, their offense got a lot better. This was the 16th best offense or 15th best offense in the league 2 years ago, and they were a top 10 offense all year last year. Where'd they finish at? Let's see. They finished at number 8 in offense. Remember, they were one of 5 teams, I think it was, that were top 10 in both offense and defense. According to Cleveland Glass, they were 6th in defense and 8th in offense. And 2 years ago, they were middle of the pack offensively. The biggest thing that changed with them is how good they got with Rudy off the floor. I actually want to spend quite a bit of time on that today, because I think that's maybe ultimately the more fascinating thing. Like, I don't know that there's anything differently you do, like significantly different strategically, schematically, to borrow a term from JJ Redick, on the defensive end of the floor when Rudy's off the floor. I just think it's playing harder and rebounding better. That's the biggest thing. And I do think the Conley decline and going from slow-mo to, call it slow-mo to Julius Randle, even though it was really directly Cat to Julius Randle, I think the biggest drop-off is replacing what slow-mo did with, obviously those minutes got replaced in the aggregate. Jaden played a little bit more at the 4. It just shuffled things, right? Losing slow-mo really, really impacted that. And Conley clearly took a step back last year in terms of his what he's able to provide at this age defensively. I know we talked a lot about the offense, but the defense for Conley was an issue. Those are the biggest personnel problems with no Gobert. They got to play harder. They got to be more, have better gap integrity when they're guarding on the perimeter on defense, especially with Gobert off the floor. You don't have Rudy at the rim to save you. And rebound better, defensive rebound better. Those are the biggest things that are going to lift the non-Rudy defensive minutes. But I really do want to focus on the offensive minutes with and without Gobert, because the offensive minutes with Gobert are basically the same from the last 2 years, but the offense improved dramatically without him. So I want to focus in on why that is, talk a little bit about transition offense and how that sets the Wolves up to improve in those areas this year. And then we'll close by getting a bit into Ant on the defensive end of the floor. And then also what I think the biggest question is headed into the season regarding, what's going to impact where Minnesota ultimately ends up by the time we get to June, hopefully. It's all upcoming next. Today's episode of Lockdown Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. The NFL season is entering week 5 now, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Of course, there's a Thursday night game tomorrow. 49ers at Rams. LA is favored by 6.5 points. I get it. They are probably, at this point, probably a top 5 team in the NFL. Ultimately, I think they're probably more of a top 8 team in the NFL when it's all said and done. But you can take the Rams and the points that win by a touchdown, maybe at minus 6.5 is minus 104. Vikings, of course, have an early game again on Sunday, technically at Browns, but they are in Europe, and favored by 3.5 against Cleveland, who's making a quarterback change, by the way, benching Joe Flacco and turning to Dylan Gabriel. They're one of their 2 previously backup quarterbacks. You can head over to FanDuel, bet on either one of those lines or any other line this week for the NFL. You can live bet the games. You can do a same game parlay, which is a ton of fun. I love live betting, like Thursday Night Football when there's one game, or a Europe game early on Sunday is a ton of fun. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right. Let's transition into talking about the offense, and actually the transition offense, if you don't mind my cheesy segue. 2 years ago, Minnesota's offense without Gobert on the floor, or actually let's say with first, with Gobert on the floor 2 seasons ago was 58th percentile. Not even really good, just decent, league average-ish, 58th percentile. Last season with Gobert on the floor, 56th percentile. So actually slightly worse, but basically the same the last 2 years with Rudy Gobert on the floor. With Rudy Gobert off the floor 2 years ago, they were just a 55th percentile offense. And last season, they were 82nd percentile in offense without Gobert on the floor. So you wonder where did the improvement take place on the offensive side, and where did the defensive regression take place? And it goes back to what I've said since the very first day they traded for Rudy Gobert 3 years ago. Rudy Gobert is the ultimate floor raiser. He's a constant. He's consistent. You know exactly what you're getting from Rudy Gobert. Their offense was the same the last 2 years with him on the floor. Their defense was virtually the same with him on the floor. It was the defense without him that got worse last season versus the year before, and the offense without him that got better with him off the floor. With Gobert, everything's the same. This is the same as what it was 2 years ago. This was a 56-win team. Conference finals, of course, last year they still get to the conference finals, but a relatively disappointing regular season. Took time to integrate Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo to overcome the loss of Karl-Anthony Towns, the whole thing. But the biggest differences happened with Gobert off the floor. On the offensive side, what improved the most with him off the floor? Well, it's something I was clamoring for 2 years ago. It's when, 2 years ago, I said all the time, when Cat's at center, you got to run. You got to run. You have to take advantage of having Karl-Anthony Towns at the 5, who's one of the very best three-point shooters in the league, full stop. And good in transition, good getting downhill, can run the floor, long strides, good at drawing fouls, all of that, and likely more mobile than the opposing 5 in most scenarios, right? They didn't do enough of it. Last year, obviously without Karl-Anthony Towns, but arguably with better personnel to push pace because you don't have slow-mo. Julius Randle's really good at pushing pace, arguably better in transition than Cat, obviously not as good of a shooter. But if Julius is handling the basketball and pushing in transition, you're going to have more success than what you did 2 years ago. So I pulled the transition numbers for each of the last 2 years with Gobert on the floor and with him off the floor. So last season, well, yes, I already said that. So with Gobert off the floor last year, Minnesota didn't actually run that much more. They were just a lot better at it. They did run a little bit more, especially off of steals. So two seasons ago, we'll look at it this way. 2 seasons ago with Gobert off the floor, they only ran 65% of the time off of steals, which was just 41st percentile league-wide. So below average in running off of steals, which obviously they should be your most efficient opportunities in the open floor. You get a steal, you pick off a pass, you get a pick six. Like, you push pace, right? That's what you should do. They did it less than 2/3 of the time 2 years ago, 41st percentile league-wide. Last year, that went up to 69% of the time, which was still, it was 61st percentile. So they jumped, 15 percentile point, actually 20 percentile points, or percentiles, I guess. And 5-6 percentage points in terms of frequency of running off steals. They didn't actually run any more off of rebounds. In fact, they ran a little bit less off of defensive rebounds. So overall, in transition, their overall transition frequency went slightly down. They just got a lot better at it. 2 years ago, they were just 51st percentile in points, 55th percentile in points per possession in running on transition. Last year, they were 82nd percentile without Rudy on the floor. So they got much better at running without Rudy. I think part of that is coaching because it's largely the same personnel. And then I do think there is the Randle really, again, replacing the slow-mo role in this position with Julius Randle. I mean, Julius Randle's a better pace pusher and more of a weapon, obviously, in the open floor than Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson was effective, a good player, and important in a lot of ways. But in terms of pushing pace without Rudy Gobert on the floor, Julius Randle's a better weapon for that. And this is something that came up, I think, in the Britt Robson interview with Chris Finch, that Ant loves to slow things down, survey the floor. I talk about that all the time. So he hasn't helped in that regard, and Ant's going to be a big piece of how this thing gets sped up, and they play faster, and they're more efficient with Gobert off the floor. I think that's going to be super important. But the biggest difference, again, in raising the level of the offense from 2 years ago to last year with no Rudy on the floor was they just got better at running in transition. And I don't think that's the TJ Shannon impact yet. but I think he will have an impact because that's all that guy wants to do. I said that since the day he was drafted last summer. TJ Shannon is an absolute terror in transition. He wants to push the pace, sometimes to his and his team's detriment. You saw that at Illinois, but he was so good at it last year in the NBA. Very rarely was it a no, yes situation with TJ Shannon, because you just felt like if he's going downhill at somebody, if he gets ahead of steam at 3/4 court, you feel like he's going to score or draw a foul or both. I think that's going to continue to the upside of the transition offense is going to continue to improve, especially with Gobert off the floor. With Gobert on the floor, they actually did run about the same amount, and even with him on the floor, it was better in transition. Again, overall, the offense was the same. So what does that tell you? Well, the half-court offense wasn't quite as good last year, and I think that's something we all saw. So they made up for some of that, actually a lot of it, because the offense overall was better than 2 years ago with that transition stuff, both with Gobert on and off the floor. With Gobert on the floor, they didn't run hardly at all, but they were good when they did it, especially off of rebounds. They just never run. With Gobert on the floor, they were third percentile in running in transition off of live rebounds, 20% of the time. So they don't do it, but when they do it, they're really good at it. And that's what made up for what they lost in the half court last year. And obviously the hope this year is they can maintain that level of transition scoring, but also continue to improve the half court offense. And I think that's a completely reasonable thing to look for. But I think the main takeaway here is Gobert is the ultimate floor raiser. We know what this team is with Gobert. It's remarkable how consistent all units with Gobert on the floor were last year to what they were 2 years ago. It's the non-Gobert minutes. And this continues to be a theme that we'll see. You saw it throughout media day. What does this team look like life after Gobert? Is it Jean Beringer that can step in and play those minutes? Are they going to evolve into a smaller team where Jaden McDaniels is playing more at the 4? Do they, what does that look like? Or, and then in that scenario, Julius Randle played more at the 5 and now Reid played more at the 5. It's obviously not a this year question, but Minnesota's starting to think about what that looks like and is focusing that much more on the non-Gobert minutes. And we could also talk about the playoffs and why that's important, but I think a lot of those Gobert playoff concerns, which is what I would not have called them, but some people would have been, put aside over the last couple of years. Gobert's been really good in the playoffs. He hasn't been the issue. One of the issues at times, sure, but who wasn't in the way the Wolves lost in 5 games in each of the last 2 conference finals. On the Ant piece, real quickly, there were a couple of quotes from Mike Conley that were posted by Chris Hine, the fantastic Star Tribune Timberwolves beat writer on X after media day. Conley said one thing that I'm going to read directly what Chris Hine's tweet was. Mike Conley said one thing the team will ask of Anthony Edwards this season is to live up to his potential on the defensive end of the floor, to, quote, guard like you're a top 5 perimeter defender in the league, which we believe you are. Whoever is out on the court, we have a job to do, and then we got to be consistent. With Ant competing the way he can compete, we're a completely different team. He knows it, and it's going to require a lot more. It's going to get him uncomfortable a little bit, end quote. Then this is also what Chris Hine said. I'm going to read another Chris Hine tweet, not a Conley quote. Chris Finch has often said one path for Edwards to become an MVP-level player is to be one of the best two-way players in the league. The Wolves want to recommit to the defensive end of the floor and play with intense pressure on the ball. Ant will be a big part of that. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm talking about, is the defensive level, especially without Rudy on the floor. Now, for Ant, I don't think he could pick and choose. He's just got to play hard a lot more often. He definitely picks and chooses right now, right? He picks the big matchups, the guys who he really wants to shut down because they're a big-name player, because it's an ESPN game or a TNT, an NBC game or whatever it's going to be this year. And that's okay. He's been able to get away with that. Again, top 6 defense, still a good defensive player, but not MVP level. He doesn't have to be Giannis, but he could be a top 5 perimeter defender. He could be getting actual votes for an all-NBA team, all-NBA defensive team, excuse me. That's what's going to lift him, in addition to scoring volume, which, of course, Ant acknowledged himself during media day. We'll talk actually a little bit more about that here in a second, because I think that's super important too. But the Ant piece of this, in terms of lifting the overall defense, especially, I would argue, especially with Gobert off the floor, this team has a solid floor with Gobert on the floor. We know what they're going to provide defensively, no question. Okay, let's close by talking a bit about what I think the biggest question is this year. There's kind of a consensus where, if anybody just asks, and actually there's an ESPN article that mentioned this, there's an assumption about what we should be most concerned about this year for the Timberwolves. What's the biggest question, right? I have a different take on that. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I love how the Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It will actually track your reps, suggest the right weights, corrects your form, makes every rep smarter and safer. The swivel screen is absolutely a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat. Plus, the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. Okay, so if you asked, I don't know, I would say, well, certainly 10 NBA fans. If you ask 10 Timberwolves fans, what's the biggest question on the roster, or what's the biggest question for the Timberwolves this year? You'll probably get a couple different answers. Think of this Family Feud style, right? I bet one of the top answers would be, can they get past over the hump in the playoffs? Which, of course, very general. We all want to know that. But the biggest question coming off of the offseason, because the only difference in the roster, this is where it comes from, is Nickeil Alexander-Walker's gone. So on its face, to a casual observer, that's what you would assume is the biggest issue. And case in point, ESPN published an article, I think Monday or Sunday maybe, that said, what's the biggest question for all 30 teams? Their biggest question for Minnesota is, are Minnesota's young players ready to step up? That's how it was phrased. And that's just another way of saying, how will they fill Nickeil Alexander-Walker's role? Which I think is a completely reasonable question. And I'll go a step further. It is a legitimate question. Like, what are they going to do with the Nickeil minutes? I've talked extensively about that this offseason. Chris Finch talked about it in his interview with Britt Robson and on Media Day. Like, everybody knows they've got to recreate Nickeil's production in some form or fashion. It's going to be some combination of Dillingham and Shannon and Clark. And that is what this little write-up from Dave McMenamin at ESPN says, essentially, because Conley's aging and Alexander Walker's gone, are the guys I just mentioned, plus maybe Leonard Miller and Jean Beringer, do that, right? Sure, I'll buy that. That's the biggest, that's a big question, right? That's perhaps the biggest regular season question. When going 9, 10, 11 deep does really matter. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have back-to-backs. You're going to have fatigue. You're going to have foul trouble. You're going to have guys that you just need to develop for all of the above reasons. So, yeah, it matters who your 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th guys are. That's huge. And I'm not at all arguing that they're like a shoe-in to get back to the conference finals. It's a hard thing to do, and it's great the Wolves have done it 2 years in a row. However, what's going to take them from bowing out in a gentleman's sweep in the conference finals 2 straight years to winning the finals is not what Rob Dillingham, it's not very unlikely to be what Rob Dillingham does. It's definitely not what Jalen Clark does. It's definitely not what Jean Beringer does this year. The bigger issue is, does Anthony Edwards make the leap that we're all anticipating him to make? Does Anthony Edwards take the leap from top 6 player to top 3 player? Which doesn't sound like it's that much, but it is. I mean, think about the guys who are the consensus top 3 players in the league. It's the top 2 are obviously Jokic and SJ, who have both won titles, both won MVPs, in Jokic's case, multiple MVPs. And take the third guy. Very likely, I mean, depending on your perspective, it's either Luka or Giannis. Luka hasn't won a finals, but he's been to one. He hasn't won an MVP either. Giannis has done both. So 3 of the top 4, all 4 of the top 4 players in the league have been to the finals. 3 of them have won it, and 3 of them have been MVPs at least once. That's a big jump for Ant to go from, and I had him 5th on my list of best players in the league. I think ESPN had him 7th, and I think he was 6th on the lockdown list. Can he make that jump into that top tier of guys? And it's not simply what the end result is. That's not why those guys are there, but it's because they performed in the moment. And of course, Ant needs help. That's all true. Jaden's got to improve. Like, that's probably the second biggest question, honestly, is does Jaden McDaniels become a clear second option offensively? I know Julius Randle is right now, but Julius Randle's on the other side of 30 and has a shorter contract and is much more likely to be traded and has less of an impact defensively. So if Jaden McDaniels can continue to improve on offense, how much bigger of a difference does that make for Minnesota? Makes a massive difference. So I would say the biggest question is, does Ant make that leap? And we'll have a pretty good idea during the season. And really the trajectory, the year-over-year trajectory of Ant's career oftentimes is it's a little bit flat early in the year. And you get these moments in October, November, December. It's like, oh man, is he doing it? And then really ultimately it's kind of the same as the year before. And then midseason he hits this, there's this pop where all of a sudden Ant is Ant. And it's like, oh, whoa, he did make an improvement. Can he avoid that this year and just be amazing from the jump? Obviously a different player than like an SGA, but SGA did that a couple of years ago. And obviously last year it culminated in an MVP season, a historically great individual season and team season for OKC. Can Ant do that? Obviously in a different way, with a different style and in a different way of going about achieving results. No question. That's the biggest question, because that's ultimately what's going to get this team. Again, I'm not saying they're automatically making the playoffs. They're automatically in the conference finals. Far from it. But I'm less concerned for all the reasons I've said on many shows before. I think TJ Shannon is a better offensive player ultimately than Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I think defensively, he's decent enough. Plus you add in Jalen Clark, and then any offense for Rob Dillingham, honestly, is gravy. I'm less worried about the Mike Conley role because I think they can kind of cobble together some stuff there. I think it's all, the rest of the roster is good enough to win a championship. It really is. It's just as good as the other guys on some of these other rosters that have recently won championships. And I don't necessarily mean the Thunder. The Thunder's roster is insane. And overall, it's slightly better than Minnesota's. I would not dispute that. And SGA is better than Ant. That's why they won the title. But that's why you need internal growth, development, improvement year over year within the same season from October to June. You got to get better. And so much of it rides on Ant. And that's where I would put all this is what can Anthony Edwards do over the course of the season, year over year, yes, but month over month to continually improve. And then secondarily, Jaden McDaniels. I'm less worried about, like, we know what to expect from Rudy. We know what to expect. Dante DiVincenzo will be better this year. Julius Randle likely will be better this year. And whoever your 9th and 10th roles are matter, but they only matter in spots here and there throughout the season. And it's ultimately what's going to help you be 4 seed instead of a 7 seed. Yeah, probably. But in the playoffs, it's going to be Anthony Edwards. Can he come through? And in the big moments throughout the season, can he come through? And that's where my focus is in terms of biggest question marks for this season. All right, that's all I got for you today. Of course, I'll be back tomorrow. We are daily, Monday through Friday, gearing up for the season. 2 more shows this week, and on Friday, we'll be getting you ready for the preseason game on Saturday against Denver. So we'll talk quite a bit about that later in the week as well. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show can be listened to anywhere. You can watch on YouTube. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can watch there. A reminder, you can check out, for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast. It's amazing. Does a great job. I was on the show in August, I think, previewing the Wolves season, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of that very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.